rescind the bylaw. Various sections on home-based contracting business. This is home contracting business in a residential area. There's other districts within the town. We don't consider it appropriate to have a contracting business in a residential area, and we're having this town hearing to get input from the public to see what their feeling is on this. Would any of the board like to say anything else before we go any further? No?
Yeah, I'll try to share some history. We put this into place in the late 90s. Our goal at the time was to create an umbrella that businesses that fit the description could utilize. There was a period of 2 years in which individuals or businesses were given an opportunity to come in and meet with the Board of Appeals and get a special permit. A number of businesses at the time, several at the time, did that. Some other businesses have pursued the bylaw since then, but certainly not a great number. Over the last 2 years, the board has had several instances where applications have been filed for a special permit with the Board of Appeals, and the neighborhood response in those situations was rather overwhelming. And so in conversations with the certain members of the Board of Appeals and also with the building inspector, a number of problems in terms of enforcement were brought up, and the planning board discussed it, and as a result, we decided to put an article on the warrant that would essentially terminate the section of the bylaw. And that was after a significant period of time where we tried to find ways to rewrite it. And in trying to rewrite it, we looked at numbers of employees and vehicles and gross vehicle weight and all sorts of things, and said, you know, trying to rewrite this isn't working for us. We're probably better off to vote to get rid of it, and perhaps in the future draft a bylaw modeled after what some other towns have done that tries to deal with tradesmen perhaps rather than contractors. Instead of calling it a home-based contractor, we've talked about calling it perhaps a tradesman. So you'd draw down the number of vehicles, the number of employees, issues like that, and gross vehicle weight for vehicles, that sort of thing, and then try to see if we could come up with something that we could bring to town meeting in the future and get some support for. But I think that's, in general, a history. I think that's a reasonable synopsis, anyway. But I thought it'd be helpful. Charles isn't sure.
Would you like to add something, Charles?
Huh?
Would you like to add something?
Oh, what are you?
That's all I have to say now.
Good. I think that's all baloney. Back in 1980, when we first did this, we had the biggest meeting of a public hearing that we ever had. And it was downstairs in the cafeteria here. It was full, overflowing. Because everybody came because they thought we were going to put them out of business. Well, it turned out we didn't. And I think we had a pretty good bylaw. Now, what Timothy alluded to was kind of bending to wants of the gutless boards that had to deal with it. And I think that we had a pretty good bylaw. When we first started to work on this, we had some good changes, I think, written by Timothy himself, and I think they were excellent. And I can't say put them back in because that isn't what did the call to this meeting say?
We missed it.
What it says is, the Town of Berlin Planning Board will hold a public hearing pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 40A, on this date, and the proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw would be to delete from Section 340, Table of Accessory Uses, the line referring to home-based contracting business, delete Section 540, Home-Based Contracting Business, and then delete from Article 14 definitions, the definition for home-based contracting business. So that's the article. There's three parts of the bylaw.
Just
One is the
delete.
table, one is the explanation, 540, and then one is the definition.
Now, just like that, this would have no effect on businesses, home contracting businesses that have a
Yes,
special
yes,
permit.
it does. It does have an effect on them.
Oh,
Damn it.
How-
oh.
If they have a special permit issued, it remains in effect.
That's right. Let's hope it does. Let's hope it does. By changing this, they don't need a special permit. By deleting the whole damn thing, there's no reason to have a special permit. And therefore, you're giving a free pass. You're giving a free pass to all the jerks that didn't go and get a permit, or weren't
What you're saying is that
weren't grandfathered before the thing went into, the bylaw went into effect. If they were grandfathered, they were fine. If they went and got a permit when they were supposed to, fine. But there's quite a lot of businesses out there that are, what is it? Not illegal, but, oh shit, what's the word?
Non-compliant.
There you go. There's quite a lot of businesses out there that are non-compliant, compliant. And I think they should have been made to do something about it. The building inspector should have brought them in and said either get a permit or go out of business. And it's very, very unfair to the people that did go and get their permits. And if we go ahead and just allow this to be deleted, I think it's a totally wrong thing. I think that the new bylaws that we started out to do were pretty good. They were a little more restrictive in some cases, and some cases they stayed the same as what they were originally. I think if we allow this to be deleted from the zoning bylaw, we're not doing the town a big favor. These bylaws are, not to protect you from your neighbor, but to protect your neighbor from you. That's what a zoning bylaw is for. And there's a difference.
Passed in the bylaw, and you'd never explained that to me before, but of course we've talked about eliminating ice house and sawmill, and you've said, no, let's keep them in.
Let's leave them in.
If we take them out, you're saying that they'd be allowed anywhere on any lot in any zone.
It would seem that way. Why wouldn't it?
I don't see how
Well,
you
they'd have
can
to
do
get a
that.
permit.
Unless there was some other way that they were, some other reason that they were not allowed.
I know, that's an interesting interpretation.
Well, it's interpretation, but I don't think I agree with it. I don't think Tim
I
agrees
mean, we
with it.
can certainly ask town council where
Yeah.
they.
Well, you might not get the right answer from them either.
I don't know what else you can do.
But it'll cost you a good money.
Huh?
I think something you said there, people that didn't,
That
to
might
have a
be-
home contracting business, you need a special permit. Everyone needs a special permit to have a home contracting business, as of today.
Right.
With today's law, you cannot have a home contracting business without a special
Well,
permit.
you could pre-exist zoning entirely and be grandfathered.
Well, no, the zoning says, well, the one says here is anything which was in existence in 1997 has 2 years to get a special permit.
Yeah, but
And if it's that, you say that can be ignored?
my sense has always been that if you have a use that pre-exists zoning, 1957 or 56, then that use is, if it was in existence and hasn't been discontinued, it's an allowed use. There are very few of those, if any.
Okay.
I mean, there may be a couple, but,
Yeah, there's just a few.
yeah, I think a couple people could argue that they pre-exist and so on. But to suggest that anything that isn't allowed or provided for in the bylaw is therefore allowed, if it isn't in the bylaw as allowed, it's allowed anyway. I don't know
Then we
how
wouldn't,
I
shouldn't
would,
have any bylaws.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I'd get there. But we'll throw that at
Well,
town council.
that's the way we worked the planning board for the first 10 years that I was on it, or maybe 15,
We
is if we had a problem, if somebody come in with a problem, we made a bylaw, either for or against it. And that's the way it worked.
Well, we'll throw that at town council.
Hey, Tim, can I direct you to section 313?
What's
Or
the,
look at 313, I think that should help you clarify the answer.
Thank you.
That's why we have the table, right, of uses.
That's the way you've looked at it.
Yeah.
31C3 says, a use which is not specifically authorized in a district and which is inconsistent with the intent of that district shall be prohibited. But, so, you know, that's, I think, the position that we've assumed, but we'll throw it at the town council in terms of this particular.
Well, that would have to be something that was, that would still mean that 99% of the home-based contracting businesses would be allowed, are legal. It would be very, very few that wouldn't,
Why?
wouldn't,
Is it on the table as a use? In residential uses? It isn't.
No, it's in the,
We're not gonna resolve this part of the debate though, right now, I think.
Okay.
And so I'd like to continue on.
yeah, basically,
here
this is the future that we're talking about
and
now.
Get
is-
some more comments.
Get
from
some
the public.
comments.
Good.
If this bylaw passes, there'd be no more allowing home-based contracting businesses, new ones, and
Residential.
in residential areas, yes.
You what?
This bylaw
Yeah.
would prohibit any new home-based contracting businesses in a residential area.
Charlie doesn't agree with that, but we're not gonna
Yes,
resolve
I
that.
do. I do agree with that.
Okay, and I think
If this bylaw, if this passes,
that's,
you can have anything you want in there.
No, because it's not a listed use.
Okay, so we're not gonna resolve
We're
it.
not gonna argue this any longer.
yeah, okay. I think that's what we want to get the comments from the public on at this public hearing.
Did
is
anyone send
that-
around a sheet?
Anyone send around the sheet to get,
Hmm?
send around the sheet, sign-off sheet? To get the list of attendees. We want to get comments from the public on future uses that would
You're gonna do it
prohibit home-based contracting businesses. Either for or against, or what you think is a good idea or a bad idea.
Are you then getting clarification on whether someone who's running a home-based contracting business today without a special permit is then grandfathered in?
That's,
Well,
no, that's not what we're,
I'm
at
just
this public
asking-
hearing, no.
asking-
That public hearing, that's not what this public hearing is for. This public hearing is for, in the future, to prohibit home-based contracting businesses.
Well, if you dissolve it, wouldn't somebody in the audience want to know if their business
Well,
is
right
legal?
now, anybody who has a home-based contracting business has to meet the present bylaw.
They're supposed to.
That-
If they
that's-
don't, it's because they haven't come in for a permit.
And they still can. Anyone with a home-based contracting business can come in for a special permit under the terms of the present bylaw. You looking at me strange?
on-
Until this passes.
No?
no,
Somebody can't come in for a permit for a home-based contracting business?
Yeah. You'd have to put a date.
No, on today's bylaw, there's a bylaw
I
on
know, but
home-based
if this
contracting.
changes, if this
No, I said
changes-
today,
Yeah.
today, or even tomorrow, or until the town meeting at least.
Yeah, but you can't get in before the ZBA, they've already had their meeting.
right.
So that's not a truthful statement.
But let's get some public comment.
Yeah.
So Ron, I'm still not clear. If a contract, home-based contractor does not have a permit today and the law passes, will he or she be in violation to continue?
Yes.
This
Under the
passes.
proposal.
Yes.
Will they
Yes.
continue to be in
Under this
violation?
proposal,
They will be.
Because they never complied with the
And they couldn't
present law.
come out of violation by applying for a permit if the law were to pass?
That's right.
That's
That's
right.
correct.
Unless we became.
Gentleman over there.
Craig Gibo, Coburn Road. I got several problems with your proposal.
Do we have to be at the mic?
When
Yeah.
you put the cart before the horse, you haven't, you're taking away something is a major concern to many people in town. I was part of that bylaw when you wrote it for home-based contracting business years ago. It's helped me out. Biggest problem right now, there's no enforcement. So there are people that are operating home-based contracting businesses or tradesmen's businesses or whatever you want, that don't even realize that they're not in compliance because we have no enforcement in town. If they were made aware of that, there would be many people at ZBA saying, can I have a permit, please? So, your bylaw takes, your attempt to remove that bylaw, allowing it, takes away the opportunity for someone to do that.
Unless we
That's-
gave a window of opportunity?
right now, that's not how it's.
Right, I
that's-
know.
I don't see that.
Right.
Okay? Yeah, if you give a grace period, a window of opportunity, that's a plus. You still haven't replaced it with anything better. You just took it away, and people that are non-compliant maybe will have a window of opportunity to become compliant. That's a hard sell. That's a hard sell. So my concern is you haven't got anything better to replace it with. It affects a lot of people. You haven't got a window of opportunity that I've heard about, and until those things are addressed, it isn't gonna fly on the.
Well, if there's a window of opportunity, then it wouldn't affect anyone. They would come in, they could get a permit. And
It affects
this-
anybody in the future.
It affects
That
people
may
in the
live
future.
here,
They
that may
cannot
be
change
thinking that
it.
they wanna start, because they've lost their job at some high tech, and they wanna
Exactly,
start,
that's right.
you know, a home base. So, yeah, it does affect people.
Right, okay.
So, until those things are addressed, I really don't think it's gonna, taking away, you know, a town floor is gonna work, okay, until those few things are addressed.
Karen Nielsen, Gates Pond. I'm a real estate agent in Massachusetts, and first of all, it brings value to your property. So if you take away that value, because right now you can sell your property and you're gonna add 50 to 80,000 depending on where the property is, what type of house it is, et cetera, location, but you're still adding value because you can sell that permit with the property. So, my understanding is it goes with the property.
It has to be applied for individually.
Correct, when you have a permit in place, it goes to the property.
No.
Maybe I'm reading something wrong, but that's what I read.
No,
No,
But otherwise, it is a value to the people living there, irrelevant of them going forward with it. But I agree with you, Charlie, in reference to if you remove that bylaw, half the town is a working town. A lot of people here have equipment, it costs thousands of dollars to go to a different location to put that equipment. What I have found and seen at different meetings, personally, is when the ZBA does a meeting, they do not go and look at the property. I was at one last month, and they were asking this poor man to put up a fence, maybe drive by, see if he needs a fence. He may not need it. To me, if I go look at a property, I can't say what your house is worth, or your house is worth, or your house is worth, without looking at it. So how can they tell what this person needs until they look at the property and say, okay, it is in compliance, oh, it'll work, it won't work, this is what you need, Mr. Contractor, you need a shield to go, you know, for your equipment. Or no, you're way up in the woods, how would you bother your neighbor, et cetera. Or not go by neighbors, go by what the law is specifically. Go by each individual case, each individual property. Excuse me, I have a broken tooth, so it's a little bothersome to talk. But it's a value to the people living here that have equipment or don't have equipment. It's not up to, I feel, what neighbors say or the volume of neighbors coming in. It's the people, go look at their property, see what they have, and base it on that. But if you take away something that most towns don't have, and I speak from experience, a lot of towns don't have it. They like the ruralness, or they like the privacy, or, you know, they see this one has it and that one has it. Well, I applied for a permit, but yet selective zoning comes into play on a lot of the people who don't have permits. You talk about grandfathering, if you look at your zoning bylaw, there's a little note about that. The grandfathering issue from 1956, which is right in your book. So Charlie, I agree with you exactly that it should be in place. I agree with you, it's very well written. I think you've covered every little basis. But once the people go, the ZBA, one person goes to the person's property, then goes to the meeting, I think they can better evaluate it and say what the individual needs, if it's gonna be intrusive to the neighbor, if it's gonna be intrusive to the street, or whatever it may be. So I think that's what's needed is, they're not going to the property, they don't know the property. Or they're citing things from seamstresses. That's not home contracting business. They need to read the bylaw and read the actual bylaw that people are there about. Yes, it was quoted,
I
the
think
wrong
you're
bylaw,
discussing how
so.
the ZBA does their business, and
Right, but it's important for
Doesn't really-
the contractors that may be here, that they want to be familiar with the property in place, what exactly they're doing, so they can speak basically intelligently about,
yeah, but that's
Yes
them,
or no?
not us.
yeah.
right, but if you're going to eliminate this particular issue, that's, I think, what is causing problems for it to even come up in the first place. The problem, you know, how did this even come about? can you tell me how it actually came about
To remove it,
to remove it?
it was the behest of ZBA and building inspector.
Really? The building inspector?
He's the zoning enforcement officer.
But I think if they go to see the properties on a
A
case-by-case
lot
basis.
of them know
it
the
would be-
properties to begin with. It's a small town.
I know, a lot of them don't. So, and I speak from last week's meeting, or 2 weeks ago, that meeting, that man needed a fence for a border, and they had no clue. So I think it's easier for their job to go look at the property, and I think in turn half of us wouldn't be here trying to keep this in place. But it is a value to the people that'll, have the property, and it should be based on the facts of what you have put in place, which seems to dictate every aspect of it. That's my opinion.
Want to say something from the assessor's point of view?
Well, if somebody else can comment.
Well,
I just want,
I
I
think
speak to
we-
valuation, I just, Karen, she may have a point that it might add value to her property, but it may diminish the value of the next door neighbor.
Right.
Especially the unpermitted, the magnitude of unpermitted home-based contracting businesses we have currently. And I agree with Craig that there are, it's somebody's livelihood, and the town has not made an effort to enforce the problems that we currently have. It's not that they're unaware. The building inspector was part of the get rid of it. He must have had a good reason, but we certainly are out there with a lot of unpermitted home-based contracting businesses. And, I thought, when I walked in here, I thought it was kind of a good idea to delete it and step back and revisit it at some point later in the future. But I guess I'm more inclined to think that it's better to just pass over it and look at a date when there's an effort, a real effort made by the town to say, with a letter or some type of enforcement that knocks on the door of every unpermitted business and says, here's your opportunity and you have to do it by such and such. And I know you gave them the window before, but I don't recall there was an effort made to talk to everyone that was unpermitted and have them come in. And I know the responsibility is on the owner of the property, but maybe we could do a better effort as a town.
Is Eloise here?
Maintain somebody's livelihood.
Eloise is watching in the other room. so
Oh, she's watching the other
Ask her
room.
on TV to come in.
When we pass a town bylaw, it doesn't come in effect immediately. Does it have to go to Attorney General? Do you know offhand? I was going to ask Eloise, she's familiar with that.
I don't want to go too far out on a limb with this one, but no, there's a lot to do with the date of the posting of the hearing, I think. It's not just when it passes, it may not be just when it passes the town meeting. It may very well be impacted.
Here she is. Keep going.
It may very well be impacted by the date at which it's posted for a public hearing. Am I way out on the limb?
No,
Yeah.
you're in the ballpark.
So that when, the idea is that when the town begins to take action through the public hearing process and the notification of a change in the zoning bylaw, I think the clock starts to tick in terms of, it's similar to what happens with subdivisions. If modifications are made to the subdivision control law, I think it may be the posting of the hearing that triggers the date of action, if in fact it's passed. Now, the Attorney General gets a shot at this too, but the clock is still ticking, I think, and even before town meeting, I think it goes back to the posting of the hearing.
You mean from the time this hearing's posted, no one can apply for a special permit under the present bylaw?
I don't.
I think
That's
that's
what
what,
we
I
think.
think that's what you said.
That's what I'm implying,
Yeah.
and I'll check that again, because my memory isn't as good as it used to be, but I don't want to encourage people to think that they have until the Attorney General
Right.
approves. And I don't want them to think even that it's at the date of the town meeting, so they can come in with an application in the next 48 hours. Because my sense has been that it has to do more with posting of public hearings. But we'll check on that too.
Do you have anything to say, do you? Eloise?
No, that's pretty much it.
I mean, from-
Tim's pretty much on the mark.
So you're
And then
saying-
after the Attorney General, then I have to post it in 5 places, and then people have 90 days to bring it into court.
So
And I
between the
could be-
time of this hearing and,
Yes, we just received 2 applications, and they're in under the wire.
so nobody can apply for
Well,
a
they can
special
apply,
permit?
but unless we change it.
No action would be
So
taken.
your door of opportunity has been shut, pretty much.
That's what you said, the door of opportunity has been shut, you can no longer apply for a special permit,
That wouldn't
even
stop
though the
me.
town meeting hasn't voted on it.
But
That's if the measure passes.
If
If it
it passes.
if it passes, it could be passed over, all sorts of things could happen. I mean, one has to be excited about the fact is that there's this much activity suddenly, and that there's interest on the part of the populace to come in and make
Actually
application.
show up, yeah.
That's certainly a good sign.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that speaks to what Craig is talking about. A lot of people laid side of the road for a long period of time, and perhaps would suggest that they were ignorant of the law, but we all know from any situation that we deal with in terms of government, you can't plead that case in your defense if you don't take the initiative to try to figure out what you have to comply with. Then you can't argue you're a victim. You're a victim. You've got to take some initiative. If you want to operate a business in town, you've got to go and get a business certificate. There are a whole series of rules and regulations that we all comply with: Board of Health rules, conservation rules, planning board rules, zoning bylaws, all this stuff. So, people have a burden if you want to operate a business, and they have to step up to the plate and deal with that. Now, Craig's point, I think, is well taken nonetheless, and that there's certainly room for some compromise over time. The issue I'd also like to throw out is if we were to look at ways to modify the bylaw as it exists today, not at this town meeting, because that can't take place, and that's something that the planning board certainly worked on up until the point that we finally decided to cut the cord. But are we saying, or are you saying that only the bylaw that exists today is one that you find acceptable, or are there modifications to the bylaw that you would think would be appropriate and make it more fair, perhaps, to the community as a whole?
I think that the modifications that you suggested before you brought up the blackout was a lot better than what we have.
Now, those were taking it to 2 employees, or 1 employee. That's right. We said you could have 1 employee.
On the,
At the
At the premise.
premises. In other words.
You could go out and meet other employees.
You could have 10 painters,
Right.
but you only could have
One.
one beside yourself at the premises.
And we were gonna cut gross vehicle weight, and one of the things that Buddy talked about was when you need a jump in your
Commercial
license,
Commercial license.
26,000 gross vehicle weight. We looked at that. There are also some other towns that talk about gross vehicle weights that are significantly lower than that, which, we could look at too. But, I mean, those were a couple of the things that we had talked about. What's the mood of the crowd here?
Yes, please.
Carol McDonald, Gates Pond Road. My understanding purpose of the bylaw is to allow people to run a painting business or an electrician, be an electrician or something out of their home, or a small contractor. It's not to run heavy equipment. It's not to, the town wants to allow its citizens to perform their work, to have a trade, and to run that trade out of their home, not to turn this into a city where we have trucks coming and going all the time. And I think getting rid of the bylaw potentially opens the door to problems, and that modifying the bylaw to restrict it to more passive use of a home-based contracting business is what's called for. That's my take on it.
But can you quantify what you'd consider to be appropriate levels of activity? In terms of employees and hours of operation and that sort of stuff?
No. And I understand that that's your problem. I do understand that that's
She
where.
can tell you if you don't, she
That's
doesn't.
where we get the big bucks, right?
That's right, that's what we pay you people.
Oh, yeah.
No, but something that's not detrimental to the neighborhood.
Right.
I mean, if you've got 15 guys on your property every day, if you're running a machine shop or a wood shop or something, that's different. That's detrimental to the neighborhood. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to have some place to park your work van at night. And I actually heard there's a town who, if you have a truck with a commercial plate, it has to be in a garage. I mean, we're not that nuts, I don't think. I hope not anyway. But at the same time, if you have a van that carries your tools back and forth to a job, you should be able to have your home office and park your van in your yard.
Isn't that home occupation?
No.
Partly.
You could be taking your employer's truck home and have the same impact on your
Right.
neighborhood,
Like Kevin's been,
Yeah, Kevin Diggins, Gates Pond Road. I am curious about other comparable towns like Bolton, Boylston, things like that, and how they treated Karen's comment about not many other towns allow this sort of thing. Yeah, I think it set us up to
Be the one.
attract maybe more businesses like
Right.
this, and cut the sort of looser bylaws or the more permissive bylaws coupled with what seems to be loose enforcement of those permissive bylaws, I think is really causing some trouble. And I'm wondering about if the planning board has looked into or benchmarked any other comparable towns as far as they're permitting this sort of activity.
funny you should mention it. I think he's sorting through it right now.
Well, I wouldn't say my research was exhaustive, but I did discover what I think you've mentioned, and that east of us in particular, you're not finding these uses allowed in a residential zone.
Because they don't have enough land, is what
Yes,
I'm
they do.
finding.
And so folks are being pressured out of those communities in a significant way. And I think what we've always argued is that Berlin ought to be a community in which there's a certain diversity that's allowed in terms of occupations and the types of activities that are allowed in a residential zone. When we structured this bylaw in the 90s, the goal was to create an umbrella that had a certain amount of breadth to it. I think what we've heard from the public and the agencies of the town that have to deal with it is that the bylaw has too much breadth, and that when we've gone to public hearings where folks have come to the Board of Appeals to ask for a special permit, we've said, you have to be aware that in the infancy of your business, you and your one employee and your one truck are something that's acceptable in that residential zone. But if you grow, and we hope you do, and if that's your choice, when your business reaches adolescence, it may very well not be appropriate for you to stay in a residential zone. And unfortunately, although people are well-intentioned, I suspect, when they start their business, it gets very difficult to grow and then to move. It's too easy to still stay. And if the town isn't prepared to enforce, you end up with businesses that grow into a size that's no longer acceptable for a residential zone. And so what you have to do is capture what it is that's allowable to begin with and make sure that you can enforce it in such a fashion that you can protect the abutters and their property rights and their values. I don't think that we feel that the bylaw was structured in such a way that it really serves us as well now as it might have 15 years ago. The town's changed, and it'll continue to change. So, that's sort of where we've come from. But when I've looked at other towns, you talked to, I guess I had a conversation with the Northborough town planner, and she said, no, it's not something that we're allowing. We don't have an interest in allowing it. But Northborough, one would argue, is denser. Lots are smaller. Residential lots are smaller. In Berlin, you still have lot sizes that are, by and large, significantly greater. Perhaps you'd argue that you ought to say, provided the lot has X number of square feet. If you're on Brigham Road or Bailey Road and you've got a lot that's 60,000 square feet with 100 feet of frontage, can that accommodate a home contracting business? Doesn't seem like that's appropriate. If the Board of Appeals denies that application, they'd argue that it's based on the impact it would have on the neighborhood and the inability of the lot to handle the size of the use. But, maybe that's something that needs to be built into the bylaw to begin with. That you need to say, if you've got a 3-acre or 4-acre lot, then you can have up to a certain size business. But we were talking about one employee. I'm interested in hearing what people have thoughts about that, compared to the 4 that we allow now.
Yes.
I know of many people in town, tradesmen, I think was a good term that Tim used earlier on, which really have no more impact than a home-based occupation has. They have no visible outward sign at all of their tradesmanship in town. I think, penalizing them because they have the name electrician versus engineer on their job description is crazy. You have to take a look at the real impact of the tradesmen, their yard, their vehicles, etc.
That's what I said earlier about looking at each case, each house, each property.
If you wanted, you asked, is it Carol? What would be an acceptable limit? Well, at least putting the bar as high as home-based occupation seems to make sense. If you want to put the bar higher.
So I want to draw a couple of analogies and ask a couple of questions. If you were to remove the financial marketplace from New York City, it would be a tremendous uproar. If you were to remove the ability for the farmers to farm in Berlin, I'm working on that.
Yeah, you get it.
There would be an enormous uproar. I have to believe, and I don't know the statistics, that this town has a good percentage of folks that get their livelihood out of home contracting. And as many of you know, I'm a white-collar guy. I don't have a horse in this race. It doesn't directly impact me. But if you were to successfully pass this bylaw, not only would you enrage a great deal of the populace, and I support, comments like Craig made and other contractors, I think you not only would create a rage, but beyond that, I think you'd be probably faced with a lawsuit challenging the bylaw change. You currently got lawsuits, as I understand, in connection with the home-based contracting, with the law as it is. I think you'd have a whole other wave of them.
But the
just-
law, but the lawsuit is in, because they're not complying.
No, but I understand that, but I'm just saying you'd have a different type of lawsuit. I think you'd enrage, I don't know what the percentage is, a percentage of the town populace that survives on this.
But you know what Tim was saying earlier is, if people aren't coming in and getting their permits, then neighbors, they just run wild and neighbors get upset, all right? And they have a right to, it's their residential area. And if no one's enforcing it and no one's applying and nobody has any statistics on what the business is, then everybody around them pays too, and that's what you're not looking
Okay,
at.
no, I am. But let's just say, for argument's sake, the law passes, and there's no lawsuits. Do you think Mr. Jones is doing it now, is gonna stop doing it, or Mr. Smith, who is going to start, is gonna stop starting?
Well,
And more, wait a minute.
if you put a cease and desist, they may.
But wait a minute. Today you can put a cease and desist. You don't need this law to be removed. And aren't the problem cases that you've got, not you personally, but the town's got, because they violated the bylaw, not because the bylaw exists?
That's correct.
Okay, so by deleting the bylaw or permitting it to be removed, thereby prohibiting those lawful folks that are not troublemakers, let's call it, to not lawfully apply for a permit, what value is that?
But one of the things we're discussing is maybe we need to make a window of opportunity to bring everybody up to speed that's here, just like they did when they wrote this.
Why not do something as simple as enforce? If your goal is to...
Good, get on
if
your
you're-
horse,
if you're-
get out there.
No, but I'm not the enforcer. We have one of those, and if that's what if
We
that's
don't
the
have
will
one.
of, well, wait a minute, if that's the will of the selectmen or the people, that's what should be done. The law exists, I can't address whether it's good or bad or in between, it's way beyond my pay grade. But that's something that all of you
Certainly
in this...
beyond ours.
But if that's the problem, those that do the enforcement should enforce, or those that direct enforcement, which is really the selectmen or perhaps you, should direct that enforcement be increased. I just think
We've
you're...
been saying it for a long time.
But by removing the bylaw, how is that gonna help? That's just gonna enrage another group of people and cause property rights to be shrunk even further.
Peter, with all due respect.
What do you mean property rights?
When we first opened this up, Tim tried to explain that we had several meetings and we got mired in how do we craft this in such a way that is fair. We talked about numbers of employees, we talked about gross vehicle weight, and we had varying opinions. And we felt that the populace would probably have varying opinions. We all agreed that what we have now isn't really working for what we want to do. So the vehicle to get us all back to the table was to eliminate it and start over, and instead of trying to put Band-Aids on what we had, because we didn't have a clear direction. We don't get consensus in this room, we don't have consensus here. Maybe that's not the best approach, but it was an approach that was a lightning rod to get people here to talk about it, because people weren't. We were getting dribs and drabs and hearsay and conjecture, and it just wasn't going anywhere. That was how we started it.
Look, if your goal is to get people into this room to discuss it and get interest and so on, I think you've achieved it, and you'll achieve it further if you don't move to pass it over it at the town meeting.
Well, another good point is it's not the four of us that are going to vote to pass and enact this law. It's everybody that shows up to town meeting. Everybody gets one vote. So if it's voted at town meeting to get eliminated, there's enough people there that are sick of this, they're gonna say, no, this isn't a good idea. Or there's gonna be enough support that says, no, don't scrap it, we like what we see, we need to modify it or whatever. But it gives a vehicle for all of us to start the dialogue, get something perhaps better than what we have.
Thank you.
I think
probably pass it over for this year, come up with a replacement or an alternate for next year with some review. So once you eliminate the tool for any form of compliance, which if there's gonna be no enforcement, then none of it really matters. But if there's gonna be any form of enforcement, you have some things that could comply that no longer can comply. And it would eliminate the amount, it would actually help the town to ease those uses through, and then mold the new bylaw that fits everybody's needs. But if you completely eliminate it, yes, everybody's still non-compliant, but there's absolutely no tool to become compliant for that year's period. Just a thought.
What would it take to get enforcement? Why are there businesses being allowed to be non-compliant and still operate?
Good question.
Thank you.
Who's responsible?
Planning board. I mean, not planning board.
Selectmen?
Building
Well,
inspector.
Zoning enforcement officer.
What's
Should be.
I think that's really where we need to direct our energies.
I don't disagree.
And I do have to say, though, that I think if I went to the building inspector and said, how many written complaints do you have in regard to any number of issues that we might argue on enforced, he'd say, I don't have any. So, you know, we might assume that because we know what our neighbor is up to and shouldn't be doing, everybody in town knows, but, and the zoning enforcement officer knows too, but that's not always the case. The other issue is, though, I think people as individuals need to take the initiative to
Right.
express their concern about zoning infractions that they believe, and put it in writing. It needs to be.
If it's not in writing, he will not address it.
That's sort of.
Could it be that people understand that nothing's gonna happen?
No, you know, I had this very situation where I live. I had two non-compliant people, real messes, one in back of me and one in front of me. The only way he'd address it was if I put it in writing. Finally got to court that way.
But it took how many years?
It closed him down 15 years.
Right.
So what's the consequence?
But-
Coming in for a permit?
But that
Well,
would.
no, well, the problem is that some people are sleazy, all right? And they lie about how they've been operating and how long they've been operating and what's been there. And they try and claim they've been grandfathered in when it's not the truth. And in those cases, you have to take them to court. That's the only way you can get them to, you know,
It took you 15 years to go through the court process.
yes. Some of that was due to council changing for the town and, you know.
Now, who are the enforcement officers? Is Larry he's
Yes.
the building inspector?
He's
Is
the
he also
enforcement.
enforcer?
Yes.
And he obviously is aware of his job on that.
And he's the one that has to get the complaints in writing. He has to get them in writing.
But he knows them.
No, but
So
it
It
if
doesn't
he-
make any difference.
If he becomes aware of somebody not compliant, whether they have applied for a permit or not and been denied or not, if they're not complying with what they've been told to do, how do you stop it? How do you stop the people from doing whatever they want
What
to
you
do?
do is you write Larry a letter, you copy the selectmen. And you keep writing and you keep copying until somebody does something.
Larry will issue a cease and desist order.
Right.
And then,
If they
but,
continue to do it, the next thing you have to do is take them to court.
but there is no way, because in the meantime, they're still doing what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, so there's no way to stop that from
Absolutely.
happening.
When you say you take them to court, is it the town that takes them to court or the
Absolutely.
individual that takes them to
The
court?
town takes them to court and it costs every one of us money when you have to take them to court.
So would it not make a certain amount of sense to?
Listen, hold it.
I
Diane,
just, you know,
has something on that.
one observation is something that Tim said, is that the growth of the business is, you know, part to Larry's defense is, you know, if somebody wants to operate a business and they know, you know, what the special permit process is like, and so they avoid that and they go, you know, into the building inspector's office and they say, I'm just gonna build this garage. And, you know, so it starts out and the neighbor is like thrilled beyond belief because now all that crap that's been in the yard is going in the garage. But then the business grows a little bit, and then before you know it, there's more materials out in the yard, and then there's trucks for sale on the side of the road, and there's more employees coming and going, and voila, we've got 3 or 4 dozen of those things. And so now, does the neighbor complain? No, I gotta live next door to that, you know? Some of it has resolved itself because some town officials have gotten involved, but the town officials don't always want to be the zoning agents. So that's kind of how a lot of it happens.
But if you
And
have
there's
a
at least a
problem,
dozen
you
that
have to
happened in
deal
the
with
past
it.
2 years, so it just snowballs out of control.
Now, take a hypothetical situation where an individual violates all the rules, and you say you couldn't do that, and they issue a stop order and so forth, and then you say, if you don't stop, we're gonna fine you $400 a day, something like that.
And we do, and it just ends
And
up
what
in
happens to
court.
that? I mean, if it goes to
Yeah,
court, does that mean that
fees and-
they hit him for $400 a day and he eventually has to pay?
I think this whole discussion has deteriorated down to how we're enforcing
Well, it's
bylaws
like
in general.
The growth management thing, I think, is a great
Well,
idea. There has to be some type
Diane,
of way
I think
to
we're
grow.
talking about
Well, yeah, it's
enforcing
enforcement, you're not
bylaws.
doing enforcement.
And this hearing is for the bylaw that we have here,
Well,
how
we're
it's
really talking
enforced.
alternatives to the
Right.
bylaw. Because
That's what we're
if we're
talking
not
about.
going to get rid of the bylaw that we have, then what are the alternatives?
Right.
Kevin?
Yeah, I want to go back to something Peter had said about enraged, I think was the word you used. And I understand the sentiment, and I think it's an interesting discussion going on. And it's going to be interesting to see how things go at town meeting Monday. But, I get back to the zoning being residential agricultural and sort of what are the expectations of someone buying a residential property in a residential agricultural zone, and not someone with an intent or happening to start a home-based contracting business, but just someone, people buying into neighborhoods expecting to, have a residential property, run around in the woods, do, raise kids, that sort of thing. And I think that some of the bylaw or exceptions that were put in place as well-intentioned sort of accommodations of reasonable circumstances wind up sort of bending over time and encompassing more and more until it becomes sort of, well, what was the original intent to begin with and how did we get away from it? And the real warning sign to me is that the zoning board has heard a number of applications for special variances to put more and more ambitious, shall I call them, home-based contracting permits in various locations all over town, with comments made to them that Berlin's known for accommodating this sort of thing. And I think it's a risk for the residential rural character of the town more than, the sort of, I don't know that Berlin's known as a tradesman's haven or something like that. I think I'm all for, small businesses or the guy with the truck kind of thing doing the painting and the contracting and stuff like that. But I think that the town has a serious problem when, there's a whole series of folks who seem to be misinterpreting the original intent of these exceptions. And whether it's, the blackout thing or something else, something has to be done with the bylaws to clarify that, because I do think there's a risk that we're gonna see more and more of this, and not, the guy in high tech who got laid off who needs to start a painting company to get by. I think these are larger contractors being attracted to the town, and that wasn't the intent of these exceptions.
Do you have a comment? Did you have a comment you wanted?
Yeah, earlier I was kind of got explained that it seems like the intent is to kind of prevent like junk accumulating in people's yards that affects, you know, the quality of the, you know, the view and the, you know, driving by. So it does seem like to totally eliminate the ability to have a home-based business is kind of like an extreme reaction to, so, you know, it sounds like recrafting what's there is a more reasonable way to go about it.
I see a couple of shaking heads there, too. Buddy?
I think I kind of agree with Mark and Craig behind me. I think you need to do something different, because I'm not sure you're going to open another whole big can of worms. I can see something else coming. But I don't think it's going to be just this. It's going to be something else further down. I'm not sure if we're ready for it. And I think you need to go over some and review some more of it, get some more information out on the table. I can just example is trailers. We went through that how many years ago now? Same kind of situation with these trailers, you know, storage trailers and things like that. People are going to start to say, okay, what do we do with this? So you're going to start opening another can of worms down the road, you know, and where's that contract, is that not? Who's going to get into that one? I think, you know, we have too much, I think, in town here, because we are known for our ledges and stone, we have a lot of lots that are pretty good sized lots, you know, and people can do things that no one knows they're doing them, and not that I'm saying that in a sense of being illegal, but as far as they can put it up behind something out of sight, out of mind. But at the same time, you know, the guy who's on a half-acre lot's a whole different situation.
I'm on a
so.
half-acre lot in front of a 5-acre lot in which an enormous business got
Yeah.
built.
I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't do something. I'm just saying I think we're in the same situation. I think we need to almost do as the woman behind me said, it on a case-by-case situation, but I don't know what's fair, what's not fair, and who's going to do the enforcing and who's going to do what. And it's, you know, I think it's going to be a challenge.
You have another comment?
Yeah, I just want to sort of correct what Kevin had brought up about my commenting and someone else about the other neighboring towns. It's residential agriculture, so if I have 6 cows, 4 horses, 2 pigs, and 100 chickens, my neighbors can't say a word because we're in agricultural land. Where Northwood doesn't have that agricultural aspect.
Can't have more than 50 chickens.
I'm just saying, I don't have any chickens. What I'm just saying is I can have all that, and you don't want to bother your neighbor either with something like that. But my point is that a lot of these towns, some areas in Bolton, you can have dump trucks, tractors, things like that. They have no problem with that. But most of the abutting towns, and I know the towns that do allow it, but it's not agricultural, it's strictly residential, so their zoning is different, so you can't really compare apples to apples by what I said. So, in certain areas, certain towns, we're agricultural, so that makes a little bit of a difference. We're very rural, and I think that not everybody's attracted to this town. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of issues with this town that, you know, people don't want to come here, but there's a lot of beautiful issues that people like to come here. But again, I just want to clarify that about the agricultural aspect, because that's a difference in zoning on different towns as to why they don't allow it.
Any more?
I'll make this real quick. Do you think just instead of, if the board considers to not pass over and amend the deletion of the bylaw to something different than that, one suggestion might be, and very simple, is amend the enforcement portion of it. I don't know what it says, I don't know if it.
Can't do it.
It's too late to do that. It's too late.
Well, let me just finish the thought, no.
No, you can't do it at this point.
Not at this point.
You can't you can't move to amend?
No, not.
You'd
not
lose
unless-
a year, right?
What's that?
You'd
It
lose
could
a
be
year.
another year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's either this is passed over or it's not. Those are the only two choices.
I think we can make some minor amendments
But it has to be,
within the
it
same
has to
frame.
be less restrictive.
The zoning amendment would have to be within the scope of the bylaw, and it's hard to.
Proposal.
Yeah, it's hard to see any modification or amendment to the scope of this text that would amount to anything.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I personally don't see what's wrong with the zoning bylaw that we have now. There's only a couple of things that you could change that would amount to anything. In fact, it's just fine the way it is. It just needs to be implemented, enforced a little better. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't think. It could get by just the way it is, just fine. And the zoning, ZBA has been complaining about it for years. I think it's just fine the way it is.
Who's, I know, I got in the back, got in the back. Who, that was Chris. I didn't see whose hand it was. I saw a hand between two people.
We did have an issue on Bailey Road. My suggestion would be to change the bylaw by just reducing the number of employees, reducing the number of vehicles, and/or requiring the minimum lot size to conform with current bylaws. I don't think it's going to pass if you vote on it to eliminate it. In this town, it won't pass. I think it just needs to be changed where some of the issues are that you're hearing from people about. In my neighborhood, we've got a 3/4 acre lot. You can't have a home-based contracting business that can be hidden from the neighbors. But they can pursue it and continue it until someone says, stop it. And they never did stop it, I don't think, to this
Really?
day. Just the vans are gone and the garbage is gone. But I think the business may be still running out of the home. But and there are just certain areas of town where there's such small little lots, you can apply for a hearing with the ZBA, and they'll listen and spend a lot of time, but you can't hide it from your neighbors on a 3/4 acre lot.
Good point. Somebody else, I think. Oh, yes.
I'm Tom Dorr. I'm a one-man band contractor here in town. And I gotta tell you, I see Larry 3 times a month, 4 times a month. I've been in this town for 10 years. I pull permits all the time. Not once has he ever approached me in any way or form to tell me that I was never in compliance, that I needed to go get this special permit. Earlier, Tim said ignorance isn't an excuse, but how does everybody here know to be at this meeting? It was because you were educated and told to be here. Well, you can't do what you don't know. And if I was never told to be in compliance with this special permit, I can't do it. So unfortunately, ignorance isn't an excuse here. People just need to be educated. And I don't think that's been addressed. That, the guys in town, we're all just little guys running around, I mean, I can't tell you, how many there are of just one-man band, contractors working out of one truck out of their house, just trying to, take care of their family. And here I am, and now all of a sudden there's this black window that I can't even though I showed up and trying to make an effort and doing it right, I can't even fix it. I'm screwed. You're not giving me an opportunity even now that I've known, not now that I'm educated on it. So I think, a little bit of it, was, it's 50-50, I think the town has some responsibility, and I think the contractors individually had some responsibility for not being in compliance. So I think, there has to be a little bit of lee room here to help us out.
I think that's understood, but why do you think the town has some responsibility in this?
Because the enforcer wasn't educating anybody. I see the guy 3 times a month. Not once in 10 years has he ever told me anything of this.
Why can't you do it now?
I was just told that you can't.
Who said that?
If this law passes.
Tim said he can't do it.
Huh?
Only if the law passes.
The window.
No, all you're gonna do is
Make an appointment with the ZBA.
Okay. I mean, when I was just told 10 minutes ago, this blackout window or whatever it was, that,
Tim said that.
If it passes, going in now is the door is closed.
Yeah.
If it doesn't pass, and he goes and file, the ZBA is gonna love us, of course, because.
So I gotta wait till, so I have to wait till Monday.
There's no harm in you filing, it's just that I don't want you to think automatically by filing you're safe. And that's what was being suggested, and that's, I think, and Eloise agreed, because of the fact that we've set the ball in motion, you know, you're in check. If it doesn't go to town meeting and pass, then, you know, you can try to comply with the bylaw. And if you want to go and file papers now, you can go ahead and do that. Get on the schedule, and my sense is that there may be a rush to the door, and there may be a lot of folks looking for ZBA appointments, and I think there already are. So, I mean, it's kind of exciting in some respects.
Okay.
Craig's again.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that's not in compliance, just go to ZBA this week, whenever you can, just apply, at least you know. At least
Tell
you're gonna
everybody
get
you
rid
know
of the
unless you
people at
wanna
town
see 'em
meeting
out
say,
of
hey, I
business.
got a application at ZBA, you can't do this to me, right? Secondly, if the building inspector goes by, sees you building a deck without a permit, he doesn't need some neighbor saying, hey, he's building a deck without a permit,
That's
right? So the building inspector has the authority to go to someone and say, you really need a permit.
But,
It never was done.
And we're quite aware of the fact that a number of violations are obvious. There are a great many violations that are not obvious. I mean, Diane stumbles on things as an assessor when she goes to do her rounds, because she's on the property and physically at a space and being able to observe. But a lot of those you'd never know were issues until you got on the property and were walking.
But the only reason why I'm making the point is
Yeah.
because you're saying that he won't do it because he's not he doesn't have it in writing.
I
So
don't want to go on record as saying that. No, I think he can observe things and he should act. But there are a number of issues that are going to go under the radar just due to the nature of the town. And that's where the abutter has a responsibility, you know, put it in writing and notify the inspector. And certainly, that adds weight to considerable weight to the issue. So, I think this has been a great hearing.
I think we've heard just about everything.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to close the hearing. Anyone last?
I'd like to say one more thing.
We don't know.
Okay, well, you can say that for the hearing too.
How long have you been in business where you are now?
10 years.
Okay, that's one thing that you can say when you go to the ZBA, is you've been in business 10 years in the same house, and your neighbors haven't complained about it yet. So that's one more reason for them giving you your permit.
Okay, that's it. Moving on, want to closing remark before we, a short remark?
Could I just ask a question on what the planning board sees as the next steps? Are you, when this gets introduced at the meeting on Monday night, are you planning on making a recommendation one way or another?
Yeah, that's what we'll discuss
So
after we
you'll
close the
discuss
hearing.
that. And just to Charlie's point earlier, I think that given the discussion in the room, even if it does get passed over or voted down, it seems like the planning board should have some hearings to, over time, next year, to at least consider modifications and clarifications to this, because it is causing confusion there. And I know you'd love to have something.
I don't think there's any confusion.
Short, you got one short comment?
Quick one. Okay, the question is, you're sitting there and you're 5 intelligent people trying to work out what's best for the town. That's
Thank
fine.
you.
Would you say there's 4? What'd you say? Sorry.
Same deal.
Anyway,
No, I
the
said
point is
thank
this, you have a group of people who are seated here who are also concerned. When you sit down and formulate these possible changes or additions and so forth in the future, depending on what happens, is it possible to have a informal group meeting, when he wants to come and throw his
Everybody
suggestions?
is welcome to come to our meetings.
It's always open.
They're always
Okay.
open.
Okay. And how is that publicized? That's our
We're
responsibility
here
again to
every other
find out.
Tuesday.
Maybe it would be good to put it on like an agenda item on the website, so.
Next, you'll
Good
want us,
people can check
all
the
our meetings
website.
televised, don't you?
No.
No.
There's a calendar on the website, right? Tells you what's going on in town.
No,
One
but
more
it's-
last
it's
closing
something as
remark
big
back
as
there?
No,
this,
it's
it
to
might
say on a
be nice.
positive note that a lot of these people, myself included, pay taxes on a lot of this, whether it be one truck or anything. That's extra revenue coming into the town that the town doesn't seem to mind collecting whether you have a permit or not, or whether you're in the process of a permit. So there's a lot of taxes
You pay taxes on the trucks.
I pay tax on my
that are paid into the town,
If they don't have the truck in
thousands
town,
of
they don't
dollars
pay taxes and lose taxes.
that the town collects, and doesn't seem to mind collecting. From us.
Okay, I think we heard it all.
We're closed.
Hearing's closed. Thank you, everyone. Oh, we moved to close the hearing.
I move that we close the hearing.
Second.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Thank you all for
Aye.
coming.
Okay, we heard all the